So good morning and thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Mike Talbot. I am Notre Dame International's Director for Initiatives in Mexico. Today is the fifth in the Mexico virtual lecture series presented by Notre Dame's Mexico Global Center. These lectures are intended to highlight the work of Notre Dame faculty, but also to deepen the community of partners we have here in Mexico. So we're very glad that all of you could join us today. Before we begin, just a few kind of logistical notes and requests. First, please keep your microphones on mute. This will help cut out background noises during the presentation. Second, feel free to submit questions via the chat feature at any point during the presentation. The chat feature is the little dialog box at the bottom of your screen. Professor Zadula will pause occasionally during the presentation so we can walk through those questions and answer any that you have. So with that, let's begin. Today, we are very pleased to have Dr. Zadula with us. She is an associate teaching professor in Notre Dame's Department of Economics. Dr. Zadula holds a PhD in economics from the University of Illinois, Chicago, and her research focuses on the determinants of citizenship for foreign-born Americans, fertility of migrant groups, labor flows, and other aspects of immigration. I should note that we were fortunate enough to have Dr. Zadula visit here in Mexico twice this year before COVID happened, once for a conference in Puebla, and another with a group of Notre Dame undergraduate students. They were doing a class on migration, immigration, I should say, and visited here during spring break. I have to believe it's no coincidence then that this same semester she won the Reverend Joyce Award for Excellence in Undergraduate Teaching. We're very happy to have Dr. Zadula with us today. Rather than going on about her accomplishments, I think we should just jump into the presentation. I know we're all very excited to hear about it. So with that, I'm going to hand it over. Dr. Zadula, thank you very much for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me, Mike. I have to say it was a pleasure visiting with you in Mexico City and having you help us get a group of the undergrads off the airplane and into our buses on our way to Puebla. I reached out to Mike initially to, of course, try to find money for my class trip. And while he wasn't able to give me any, he helped tremendously in all other aspects of the trip. So I'm very grateful for the support of the Mexico Center. So thank you for having me and for taking the time out of your day to join us. My research, as Mike said, is focused on immigrants in the US primarily. Most of the presentation is going to be kind of general about migrants from all different countries, but I will stop and highlight the situation that's particular to Mexico for the purpose of this presentation, because that's where the interest is for many of us. So I am an immigrant myself. I was born and raised in the Czech Republic, so our past experiences often form our research interests, so this is exactly where I'm coming from. So the title of the paper is Marriage to a Citizen, Just a Relief Valve for Immigration Policy or Also a Reason Behind Marital Instability. So US immigration policy has changed with sort of the increasing importance of the civil rights movement in 1965. Some of the attention was drawn to immigration policy. And at that time, they eliminated the census-determined nationality quota and really refocused the policy on family-centered approach. This, while it's important for family reunification and it's a great idea, it kept some of the aspects of caps on categories of visas. So there's limits per category, there's limits per country. So no country can have more than 7% of all visas issued, which is not an issue for a country like Czech Republic that has a total of 10 million people and very few are coming to the US. But for countries that are close and large like Mexico, these can definitely be binding. The same applies for China and India primarily. So this really changed the pattern of immigration from mostly white European to increasingly Asian and Latino. So why marriage to a citizen? It qualifies one for an adjustment in legal status. Now, if you have entered the US legally, even if you overstayed your visa, marriage to a citizen grants you a status adjustment exemption. For many other categories, that is simply not possible. You have to go back to your country, wait for sometimes years and years to get the status adjustment processed. It is a faster path to becoming a naturalized citizen. Most status adjustment categories require a 5-year waiting period. Marriage to a citizen gives you a 3-year path. When you look at the data from the US Immigration Office, more than a quarter of the new permanent residents that are granted green cards in a year are spouses of US citizens, and more than half of them have already lived in the US prior to applying. The big issue here, and what I'm going to be exploring, is that this category actually has no quota. There is no cap. All of the other categories are subject to the per category and per country limits, and this can result in very, very long periods. So I looked at the latest visa bulletin that's published by the Department of State for Mexico, and as of this month, the wait times are, as you can see, over 20 years long for majority of the family-sponsored categories. So if you are a son or daughter of a citizen or permanent resident in the US, you would have to have applied in December of '97 to just now be up in the queue for processing your possible visa, so 23 years almost. Employment-based categories for high skill, so PhD professors, advanced degree workers, those are being processed currently. That's what the C stands for. But for other just normal workers that are skilled, have some education, are professionals, you still have a over 2-year wait time there. So the wait times are significant for certain categories, even for Mexico. So how do economists approach looking at marriage? We put things in the framework of a market. We like the supply and demand categories, and we look at benefits and costs. So when we look at marriage, the seminal work was really developed by an economist from University of Chicago, Gary Becker, who won the Nobel Prize. He really put this family economics on the front page of the literature at that point. So why would people want to get married in the first place? Some of the benefits are from specialization and division of labor, some of the oldest models in economics. If I am better at cooking dinner and my husband's better at mowing the lawn outside, instead of both of us working on one and both of us working on mowing the yard later, we can split it up, we can divide the labor, and we can be done with both faster and then have more time to watch TV, right? So specialization and being able to divide the tasks in a marriage is one of the benefits. Economies of scale is, why pay rent for 2 apartments? Why pay insurance on 2 cars? Why pay utilities and electricity in 2 different places when we can kind of combine our resources and lower our costs by living together? Pooling of risk, especially in these times, many people have lost jobs with slowdown of the economy. If you have a 2-person household instead of 1-person household, your risks are smaller when you're married, because you could potentially count on the income of your spouse to sort of carry you through the rough times. Positive externalities, if I care about being healthier and I'm going to make my family and my spouse be healthier and eat better, we are going to be benefiting the society overall potentially. We don't have higher healthcare costs and whatnot. Public goods, those are the things that we all like to consume, but nobody likes to pay for them. National defense, that's an issue with Mexico all the time, and our security, right, border security, nobody wants to pay for it. Do we want secure borders? Public goods in terms of marriage, you can look at children as an example. Do we all care about our kids doing well in school and being good and growing up as best as they could? Of course. But if you ask the husband and wife separately, if they get divorced, for example, who should pay for the schooling? There is contentious custody lawsuits. Who's going to pay for what? Because at that point, you have 2 separate parties, and one of the spouses is counting on the other to always do the best for the child. So they know even if they don't pay, The other parent will do the work, will do the best for their child. So if you have the institution of marriage avoiding this public goods disagreement, they're both jointly benefiting the children, and we have better outcomes for the society, right? So in general, marriage brings a lot of benefits. In particular, for immigrants, there's additional gains to getting married. It could potentially give you access to the US labor market. It could increase your probability of employment. Sometimes it's through the role of networks. When you marry a US citizen, for example, you gain a whole network of connections, potential job offers. So there's additional gains in terms of just the likelihood of being employed, and there's additional gains in higher earnings as well. Now, these, of course, vary for immigrants from different countries because, as I mentioned, the wait times and adjustments could vary for these as well. So when we think of the marriage market from the purpose of a cost benefit, yes, we see costs associated potentially with entering the marriage market as well. We know the benefits of marriage. So what could be costly? We look at the marriage interaction, or I will in my models, from this search model perspective. So we're searching, we're participating in the marriage market, we're searching for a potential spouse. Economists like to make optimal decisions, and we like to make optimal decisions on the margin. So we look at the additional benefits and weigh them with the additional costs. That's how the best decisions are made, right? Is it worth for me to keep searching? What is the extra benefit? So what's a benefit of continuing to search for a spouse? You're looking for better compatibility, right? You're hoping that you'll find the perfect spouse that likes the same TV shows, has same views on religion, on where to send your kids to school. So as you continue to search, you're searching in hopes to get a better and better match, a higher level of compatibility. So if you think of the extra benefit, the additional benefit of continuing to search, when you just started your search and you meet the first few people, the likelihood that you will end up finding someone who's a better match is relatively high. But as you keep picking through the pool of potential partners and you continue to search longer and longer, that probability of better and better match is probably going to decrease because you've already picked through some of them. So the odds of getting a higher additional benefit as you continue to search are very low. So when we think of continuing to search, that benefit of continuous search is going to be decreasing. Now, the additional cost of searching for a better match, you can think of costs that are out of pocket, right? You have to go get your hair done, you have to buy a new dress, or go get your shoes polished, you have to pay for the dinner, someone's got to, even if you're splitting it. So there's additional costs of continuing to search that are literally out of pocket costs. But now that we've looked at the benefits of marriage, when you continue to search and don't get married and you keep on looking for a better and better match, you're also, in essence, giving up the potential gains that you could have been capturing if you had gotten married, combined households already, and started sort of saving this money and taking the advantage of benefits of being married. So when we consider the costs, it's both the costs out of pocket, but also the costs that we are giving up by not being married. Now, these costs, if you think of it, the more you're searching, the more and more it's going to get expensive. You're giving up more of these potential gains. If your time is valuable, that means higher costs. And what's critical to my analysis is that if you are limiting yourself to a specific group of partners, that cost of search is also going to be higher. If you have, so some of the research that has been done looked at, for example, religious groups. If you're limiting yourself to searching for a partner that has the same faith as you, you are going to be experiencing much more costly of a search because you are looking in a limited group of partners. So if you think of this search perspective, there's obviously benefits of continuing to search, but there's also additional costs of continuing to search. There is some ideal level of search, an ideal level of compatibility for which you should be willing to accept the partner at that point. So for my perspective, if I'm thinking of immigrants who maybe are students who are here on a student visa and would like to stay permanently, maybe you were a tourist, maybe you have a work visa that is only good for 3 years and you would like to stay permanently. There is a whole kind of area of visas that are non-permanent, right? They're non-immigrant visa, they're just temporary, but people would like to perhaps stay here. They're young, they're participating in the dating market. And one of the things that they're consciously potentially thinking about is this person that I'm considering dating, are they a citizen? Could they provide a path for me to actually get legal permanent status and give me the chance to stay in the US? And I'm not saying these are convenience marriages that people do this on purpose. This is just you as a person looking for partners, but there is one thing in the back of your mind saying, hey, I don't have a permanent way to stay here. So this is kind of something that I'm also paying attention. It would be really nice if I fell in love with a person who also could give us a path to staying in this country legally and permanently. So it's just one of the criteria along faith, along education, along all these other preferences that you might have for your spouse. Now, I have done some work and many other researchers have done that immigrants are much more likely to marry people from the same country of origin. Not that they never marry US citizens, but it's less generally depending on the population and the frame time, but it's in single percent digits that most of them tend to marry within their kind of country of origin source. So when I look at this, that would mean the group of potential spouses that would be preferred is even smaller. Because if you're just looking at your fellow countrymen or countrywomen, and you're hoping that they would be a citizen, that is really making the pool of potential partners smaller. So if we put this in kind of our classic framework of this additional cost and additional benefits, this downward sloping marginal benefit, so additional benefit of search, if I'm going to keep searching for a higher compatibility partner, the benefit's going to keep decreasing. But if I keep searching to find a better compatibility, the cost of this additional search is going to start rising. What I'm arguing is that if you are looking in a small group of potential partners, and that actually shifts and increases your cost of search even further, this would result in a much lower level of match quality for this match of two partners, so that the compatibility, while optimal given the search constraints, might actually be much lower along all of the other dimensions, like do we like the same TV shows, do we both want to go to church on Sundays. It might be lower because much higher weight is being put on the citizenship status of the partner. So I will take the quick pause. I see some chats popping up. Does this make sense in terms of kind of putting a mathematical framework on marriage choices and dating markets for people? You can just jump in and ask.
I'll just jump in and say real quickly, you know, as a non-economist, it's always interesting to see. I've never thought about marriage this way, to be candid. But you know, it resonates. It makes sense. And you mentioned about the likelihood of marrying people from their own country of origin. Presumably, that varies also with how large their country of origin is, right? If someone's coming from Fiji, it's probably much more difficult for them to find someone from Fiji as opposed to Mexico. So does that shift these charts in any way, depending on the
right? So the harder it's going to be for you to find a partner. So I'm going to actually try to measure this in my data by looking at how many people from your country of origin live in the same geographic area and how many of them are actually citizens. So I'm going to try to approximate this increased cost of search by actually measurable values. Okay, so I'm glad it somewhat at least makes sense, because I know it's hard for people to think of these decisions, and it's not like when I was dating somebody I was doing the math in my head either. But you can definitely, I was an immigrant myself, and it was a thing that was in the back of my head, like, wow, this would really make everybody's life so much easier if the person was a citizen, right? So that's kind of the framework. So we've gotten to the point where we know why we would want to get married.
Looks like we have a question from Ricardo as well. Would you mind doing that before proceeding?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so where would you put in like all of like this graph and all of this like mathematical framework of like compatibility in marriage and all of that? Where would you put like people that try to come here and they just like marry a friend because the benefit is like, okay, I'm gonna have this friend and then we're gonna be like that, but you don't necessarily have to be partners. You just have to be like close people. And then once you reach that like that green card status or permanent residency, then you don't care about that. And then like the mathematical part of like the marriage, like the cost benefit, like already have like that benefit of like being a permanent resident. So like my dating pool is like less limited, or like, or do I like take that out of the equation, or how does that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So these people are actually really not participating in a marriage market in that sense, right? They're not looking for a compatible partner as a lifelong partner and spouse. You're literally just looking for access to legal permanent residency, and it's more of an agreement. Okay, let's do this for a while. We're not really going to be intimate and actually married in that sense, but do it for papers, right? So this model. So when I started with this research, I was trying to show that maybe there's a little bit more of this, what you're mentioning, going on that we would see. But as I worked on it more and more, I realized that it doesn't really have to be just these, literally just, white marriages to marry someone for papers, that this higher likelihood of divorce in this situation among immigrants might really be just driven, not intentionally, they're marrying people and then knowing you want to get divorced, but that it really might be even subconsciously introducing this instability because you're willing to settle more along all these other dimensions, even if you truly are looking for love and not really just even paying attention to the papers per se, only for that reason. So I was trying to show that it has broader implications than just the pure kind of paper type marriages. Does that make sense?
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
No, you're welcome. So I told Michael I wouldn't admit to that because he is recording, but I will admit, so I was one of those people. I did marry a friend initially to just get access to citizens, to permanent residency in the US, because I didn't want to be without access to go to school or travel home and whatnot. So, but it wasn't really me looking for a partner and evaluating their compatibility, right? So these people are simply not participating in a true marriage market search. It would be a different model. Okay, so we know what benefits of marriage are. We know kind of how the search model would work. So what does divorce bring? So I showed you that even though the match, the quality of the match and the level of compatibility might be optimal at the time of the search, the cost being higher makes that compatibility level much lower in all the other aspects. And I will argue that once you actually gain permanent residency, that low compatibility in all other dimensions might become destabilizing in the marriage. Then it will matter that they don't want to go to church with you on Sunday. Then it will matter that they might support somebody else in the political race. Then it might matter that they don't want to send kids to private school and you do. And you didn't really care about it at the beginning. You were willing to overlook that. But now that this ability to stay permanently in this country is no longer an issue and an important aspect of this relationship, all these other compatibility traits might become much more important and then become destabilizing. So when I'm going backwards. So I looked at the data. So I look at data from 2008 to 2018, the American Community Survey. And I simply looked at what is the probability of people being naturalized, so I look at women here, given their length of stay in the United States, where I'm assuming they're eligible to become naturalized citizen, and I just split them by their marital history. So the top line, so this y-axis is measuring the percentage of women who actually became citizens within 15 years of eligibility. And this top line, the thinnest line, is women who have been married at least twice. The lowest ascension to citizenship is among women that have never been married. So at much faster rate, higher total levels, women who have been married multiple times are citizens at much higher rates in the United States. So these are foreign-born women. Now there's a whole set of factors that could be causing this. The first one that obviously jumped out at me was, okay, maybe all of the women who have been married more than twice are also older. They've just had more time to get married and remarried and divorced, right? So there's a lot of other things that I'm going to go more into detail and do a more careful analysis. But just as a motivation, when I started thinking about this, this line of research, this seemed pretty convincing as sort of a background just story, like there seems to be some kind of relationship, but I need to do a little bit more work to see what's behind this. So there's a few things that I had to overcome, or at least try to acknowledge in terms of the challenges with the data. So while I was able to look at women who have been married multiple times, I don't know anything about their prior spouses or the timing of their prior marriages. I only know their spouse's characteristics if they're currently married. So that presents an issue if I wanted to look at women who, for example, have been married before, and I'm trying to figure out whether they got their pathway to citizenship through that spouse. I simply don't know anything about them. So the only thing I can observe in the data is the current spouse and the date of the most recent marriage. So I don't have information on prior spouses, which makes it a little more difficult. The American Community Survey is basically our kind of more frequent census. There is no information on visa or changes in legal status either. All I can know from the survey is whether or not you are a citizen. And among the non-citizens, I simply don't have a way of knowing whether it's just because you are a green card holder and you haven't gotten naturalized yet, or if you might be without legal status in the United States, period. The only kind of visa proxy that I can use for permanent status is the ultimate naturalization indicator, whether or not you became a citizen, but I don't know any of the transitions in the visa status before. So in the data, before 2008, the three variables that I list here, marital history, year of last marriage, and the year of naturalization, were never asked before. So any of the naturalization research that happened using data prior to 2008, they were only able to observe the citizenship status at the time of survey. But now with these three additional questions, I can actually backtrack by using the year of last marriage and the year of naturalization, what your citizenship status was at the time of marriage. So I can tell among the women who are citizens today, whether or not they were citizens when they got married, because I can see the year of naturalization and I can see the year of last marriage. So this allows me to at least overcome some of the challenges that were faced by previous literature. So I look at women who were only married one time because of the issue I mentioned with not knowing anything about prior spouses and prior timing of marriages. And I look at women who entered their marriages as non-citizens. I restricted to fairly young sample because I am using measures of their current marriage market conditions. I will look at the availability of foreign spouses that are citizens in their marriage market. I want to know what the legal framework is in their area where they live, and that's more current. So constricting the sample to fairly young women will allow me to better capture those. In some of my models, I will also include measures of whether the women have children and how fast they have children after they got married. While that decision could be sort of jointly determined with the probability of divorce, it is also one of the things that makes divorce more costly, the presence of children. So I will try to use that in some of my estimations as well. And if you think of measuring fertility and number of children, for women who are older than 34, many of their children have moved out of the household. And the data only captures children who live at home. So I would be mismeasuring fertility and the presence of children, looking at older women as well. So several reasons why I'll look at sort of the younger group of women. The other restriction is that they had to come to the United States as adults and not naturalized. I want to look at a decision to want to pursue citizenship and become legal. I don't want to look at children who arrived with their parents and got pathway to citizenship through them. I want that to be a conscious decision on the part of the adult. And I also make sure that they have been in the US long enough to qualify for that status adjustment and being able to apply for citizenship. So 5 years for anyone who I don't know anything about. And if I know they, for example, served in the US military or are married to a US citizen, they only need to satisfy the 3-year period. So I am left with almost 118,000 women who satisfy these restrictions in my sample for that 11-year period. I am showing you the descriptive statistics. What do they look like by their citizenship status at the time of survey? So among non-citizen women, only about 3.8% of them are divorced. Among the citizen women, it's close to 9%, so significantly higher rates of divorce. I mentioned the controls for children. So if you had a child within 1 year of marriage, that signifies a little bit more that this might have been marriage because you potentially were pregnant and you're willing to invest in this kind of marriage-specific capital with that spouse. So about 23% of the non-citizens had children early on, only 12% of the women who are naturalized. Citizen women, higher percentage of them are white. Non-citizens, almost 40% are Hispanic. And I will mention here that I count anyone who indicated Hispanic, even if they were white, I count them as Hispanic. So this is sort of a mix of race and ethnicity, because I wanted to really capture more of the cultural aspect here. So non-citizens, about 40% Hispanic, only 23 among citizen women. Education, non-citizens are more likely to have less than high school. Citizen women have about 45% with high school or some college completed. The other measure of sort of ties in your willingness to be permanently in the United States is whether or not you have lived abroad, so kind of traveled back and forth in your country of origin within the past year. About 8.4% of non-citizens women have lived in a different country in the year previous to the survey, and less than 0.5% of citizen women. So all of these factors are trying to control for the probabilities of women wanting to become citizens and looking at the probabilities of divorce. Okay, I might pause for a second if there are any more questions regarding the data. No, so far so good. Okay, I'll keep going then. So I promised you I would look at my graph by marital history, where of course there could be confounding factors such as age, a little more carefully. So once I restricted my sample to these younger women who arrived as non-citizens, entered their first marriages as non-citizens, I looked at their rate of divorce, and I split it up by age, and I split it up by the naturalization status. So overall, the average for the percentage of women divorced is about 4.6%, but it is higher, of course, among women who are older, right? You had more time to get a divorce in that sense. Now, if I compare the non-citizens and the citizen women, you can see that the overall average, which we saw in the first table, is quite a bit higher, but it is higher at any given age group, right? If I look at the 25 to 28-year-olds or 29 to 34-year-olds, it still is more than double the rate of divorce among the naturalized citizens than it is for the non-citizens, even holding age constant. So this really drove me to start exploring this relationship. So I am interested in the probability of becoming divorced. That's my outcome of interest. Is this an unstable marriage that potentially ended up in divorce? And what I'm really interested in as the determinants is that citizenship indicator. So does the fact that you now, at the time of survey, are a citizen and you were not when you entered the marriage, does that make you more likely to be divorced? I am interested in the impact of the marriage market conditions. So whether there are potential spouses that you would prefer that would decrease your cost of search and make it easier for you to find a higher compatibility partner, do they impact the divorce outcome? And I'm also interested in testing the impact of the visa wait times that I mentioned. Does that make it more likely for someone to enter a marriage that might be less stable because they simply don't have another way to do so? So I'll start with the citizenship characteristics. I'm going to be estimating it with a regression model, so linear probability. And in this estimation, all that this, fancy lots of math behind this means is that I am basically going to try to impose a structure where I'm going to control for, so hold constant, all of these other controls. So I'm basically splitting my data into everybody who's the same age and looking what's the impact of divorce. I'm looking at everybody who was the same age at their first marriage, who's been here the same time in the United States. So it's all in one swing, making millions of little groups of people, trying to make sure that you're only picking up that one partial effect and holding everybody constant. Because that's what we would want, right? I would want the identical person and comparing two different possible outcomes for them. So all of these things I control for in the estimation model, and I'm interested in the impact of the citizenship variable. So these are my results. So the first column, these are the outcomes from my linear regression model. What it's telling me is that if one is a naturalized citizen, they're 2.3 percentage points more likely to be divorced, which is my outcome variable. Now, 2.3 percentage points seems like not a lot, right? But this is not a percent change. This is a percentage point change. The average divorce rate is 4.6%. So this would tell you that off of the average of 4.6%, adding 2.3 gets you to 6.9%. This is a 50% increase in the probability of divorce, which is pretty significant. Off of a 4.6 mean, 2.3 percentage points is a 50% increase. I use a different method of estimation, looking at the same model, but just different statistical method. This means that the odds of becoming divorced are 34% higher for naturalized citizens than they are for non-citizens. So it's not a trivial change. 50% increase is a pretty large impact on the probability of divorce. I look at women who got married within the 5 years before the survey, so fairly young marriages. The impact is the same, 2.3 percentage points, but women who got married within the last 5 years, their average divorce rate is only 2.2%. So in that group, the impact of being a citizen today at the time of survey increases the probability of divorce by 100%. Much larger probability change. In the model in the third column, I add some additional controls for the presence of children, the speed at which you had children, I control for income, all other things that could potentially determine your probability of divorce, and the results remain very, very stable. I do estimate the model on women up to age 64. They're still positive, just smaller impact, because I'm looking at women who have only been married once. There's just much fewer of them over that period of time. But these results are remarkably stable and remarkably large for what this actually means in the likelihood of what divorce actually does. So these are the summary stats from the numbers. So that's the first thing, looking at citizenship impacting the probability of divorce. In the same model, I measured the probability change associated with the marriage market conditions. So I looked at the percentage of all men in the area of residence, they're called PUMS, public use micro areas, who are citizens from the same country of origin, because that's been established as kind of a preferred pool partner in the match model. So in my model, I show that if the share of citizens from the same country goes up by 1%, the probability of divorce actually decreases by 1/10 of a percentage point. And this confirms my hypothesis that if there's more available partners in the group that you're looking for and they're citizens, you're less likely to get a divorce. It means you were probably more successful at finding a better match and a higher compatibility partner, and you're less likely to get divorced. My last hypothesis was that relief valve hypothesis, that there's higher wait times, and migrants from countries who experience long wait times, whether it's on the employment front or the relative front, might be even more likely to search in the marriage market and put even more emphasis on finding a citizen spouse, which could result in even less stable marriages. So I wanted to look at this in sort of a per country setting, because countries that are bound by these wait times, as I mentioned, were China, India, Mexico, and Philippines in some senses. These are also countries that culturally have much lower rates of divorce to begin with. So the overall average in my sample is 4.6%. But when you look at Mexico or China, the divorce rates on average are in the low 3s. For India, it's less than 1%. So historically, these cultures just are not, divorce is not as common. So I wanted to look at this in the sort of per country estimation. So I took my data and collapsed it to the country level so that I can bring these baseline rates of divorce into the estimation to be accounted for. And I changed it to a percentage scale so that the 2.3 percentage points is a much bigger increase for people from Mexico than it is from people from countries that have high divorce rate to begin with. So if we change it to a logarithmic scale, now it's in percents, and those are comparable across all countries. So when I do this data analysis, looking at per country, so I'm left with 64 observations because each country is an observation, and I interact this relationship between being a citizen and a prolonged wait time, I get a positive and statistically significant coefficient. What this tells me is that the impact of naturalization on the probability of divorce is actually becoming bigger and more positive as the wait time increases, which is confirming what I hypothesized at the beginning. So this relief valve hypothesis, though, as I said, it's no cap on the marriage to citizen, but there's still some restrictions. Even though for visa overstayers, this is a possible channel of getting permanent residency, and you can get that residency requirement and legal stay in the US adjusted. If you entered the United States not through the official channels that can be documented, you are not eligible for this exception. You would still have to go back to your country of origin, do the waiting period there that could potentially be years and years and years. And this is something I wanted to look at, especially here with the relationship to Mexico. I'm going the wrong way. This way. So I looked at two examples, China and Mexico, as two countries that are bound by that wait time period. As I mentioned, the average rates of divorce for China, it's only 3.2%, for Mexico is 3.6% in my sample, so much lower than in the overall data. And I looked at the impact of naturalization specifically for these countries only. So for women in China, being a naturalized citizen increases the probability of divorce by 3.7 percentage points, which is more than 100% increase on their overall rate of divorce. So very, very large increase, which again, based on my hypothesis, if there's long wait times, entering less stable marriages would make that more likely. But for Mexico, the impact is only 1.5 percentage points. still relatively large. It's 50% or maybe 45% or so of the 3.6. So comparable with the overall data, but in levels, they're much smaller. But knowing that geographic proximity of United States and Mexico, there is a much higher population of migrants from Mexico who enter not through the official channels, and they did not have a visa to come in and just simply overstayed the visa. This would also be consistent with the data as well. If there's a larger share of migrants from Mexico who actually are not eligible for this status adjustment, then they would not be able to use this channel to get that adjustment in the first place, and we would expect that impact to actually be smaller in this subpopulation than it is for some of the other migrants. If you are coming from China, you had to fly in. There's really not many other options that you could get to the United States, though I think I saw on the news a couple days ago the increasing numbers of migrants from India who are coming through Mexico. So it's not impossible, but just much less likely. The proximity makes it more likely for migrants from Mexico and Latin America to come through without actual port of entry entrance. So in conclusion, I am trying to put a little bit of light on this family-centered immigration policy that makes it very difficult to get legal permanent status in the United States. And this one category that is uncapped and allows unlimited access. And I'm arguing that if the search in the marriage market is indeed influenced by the decision to gain legal status, that this might be causing marital instability and higher probabilities of divorce, which my empirical results supported. For the future and sort of policy implications, I didn't go into depth in this presentation, but divorce is very costly, right? There is a huge welfare loss to the society from divorce. If there are children present, I had mentioned briefly custody issues and emotional stress on children, parents, foregone welfare to the society when a marriage splits up, and how that could have long-term implications in terms of educational attainment, even wages for the children. All of these are really costly to us as a society. So having a policy that potentially is destabilizing marriages in this sense could present a fairly high cost. So I would like to sort of look at, is this possible to offset and give access to permanent residency through different channels, right? That could be more along the lines of policies of other countries. Canada, they have point-based system that you can gain access to permanent residency through your skills and education, not so heavily focused on family reunification. And that is it from me.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed that tremendously. It was incredibly insightful. I'll invite everyone to submit questions via the chat feature or to raise your hands as people are submitting those. I'll just ask, I don't know if there's data on this or not, because it happens more at the adjustment of status green card stage as opposed to naturalization. But of course, there's supposed to be a process of vetting through which, quote unquote, the legitimacy of the marriage is assessed, right? To kind of weed out, as you rightly point out, this is one of many factors, but places in which, circumstances in which it is the primary factor. Is there information on the efficacy or how that process even affects this?
So I don't know if anybody publishes data on how many marriages they deemed unfit. But again, I'm trying to argue a bigger picture, right? That this is not even the small percentage of people who literally do this for papers, that this could be affecting marriages that are real, that are very much people who are in love, but they're willing to overlook some of these other things because they just feel they need to pay a little bit more attention to that citizenship status of the spouse and are willing to compromise a little bit on the other stuff that will end up to matter later on.
Great, thank you. Ricardo has another question.
Hello, it's me again. I don't know if you do any of this in your research, but like you're talking about like the costly parts of like divorce and all of those things, but also I was wondering if you have done any research on like this dependence on like citizenship or like maybe overstay your visa and things like that, like with an increase in the rates of domestic abuse.
So I haven't. I know there's few people at Notre Dame who do work on domestic abuse. I don't know, and in developing countries, I don't know if they've looked at domestic abuse in particular among immigrants. I haven't. The data is extremely difficult to get. There's not good surveys that would get you both the citizenship status and domestic abuse data, right? So if you get hospital records or surveys, you might get one, but not necessarily piece the other. It might be a little difficult to get the correct data, but that's definitely interesting, right? That if you feel like some of the people who entered these marriages and they were suboptimal in other aspects, and it could lead to dangerous situations, but they feel like they're trapped and they can't leave until they get the status adjusted, that absolutely could be quite a bit of a concern as well.
Thank you
I
very
know
much.
there's legally, if that is an issue, you can actually go and apply with a lawyer for kind of, you can still file for divorce even before that eligibility is actually up for you getting your own green card, and you can argue abuse as a reason for why they should grant you the status adjustment even if you terminate the marriage. But again, do people know that? Do people have the resources to do that? That, yeah, definitely could be a concern.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for your
You're
time.
welcome.
Could I just ask, I'm curious to know more about the decision-making process. You laid out very clearly the fact that people consider multiple market factors when deciding to make a decision about divorce, or a decision to marry, but of course they do the same when they make a decision to divorce. Mm-hmm. And in some ways it's different because in the case of marriage, essentially both people are consenting, but it's quite possible to have a divorce and not have wanted to do that yourself, just have your partner decide to do that. And of course, you mentioned that there are cultural factors. The social stigma in Mexico might be greater than it is in some European decisions. So how does that? I guess your model presumes that the decision about citizenship just goes off of the table once someone obtains citizenship. But are there other factors that now are entered into the mix? You mentioned children, obviously, the social stigma of their country. Are there other aspects that might go into that decision, especially in light of the fact that it's not necessarily entirely your decision?
Yeah, no, of course, right? So in some of the kind of alternative specifications, I included, for example, income. It's harder for couples who don't have income that's sufficient enough to support both of them separately to enter a divorce, right? Often women will feel like I haven't had a job, I've been home with the kids, I can't really afford to get a divorce and be on my own because I won't be able to support. So I try to include as much of this as I can in the model as well, so to kind of control for that factor. And still, even after including all of these, right, the presence of children, how fast did you have kids after you got married? I still come with that same strong impact of the naturalization status being really highly correlated with the likelihood of divorce. But the cultural factors, I would love to be able to look at marriages that are between just people from the same country. Look at marriages where they married a US citizen who was of different race, who was, a US born person, not a naturalized citizen. I've done some work on how much that makes a difference, whether you married a person who's a naturalized citizen versus married a US born citizen. But in this analysis of divorce, I simply don't have any spouse information among those who did get a divorce. So I can't do that, but the cultural aspects are huge. So that's why I've done a lot of the work trying to control, at least for the country of origin where you are from, to capture that, right? To get that sort of influence of your culture in there, but I'm limited by the data in that aspect.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. We're coming up on an hour now, so I'll just open up one more time, see if anyone has any more questions. If not, thank you very much for joining us today, Zadula. Thank you for your presentation. I found it very interesting. So we do have one more question here. This is from Sarah. She says, thank you for this presentation. I also wanted to ask about domestic violence and abuse, both in the US and in other countries, and how the challenges and obstacles of navigating the US immigration system contribute to rates of domestic violence. Thank you for asking about that. I would be interested in outcomes for children when parents divorce due to domestic violence. Access to support for healing for domestic violence is so limited by language barriers. An excellent point. Economic factors, access to transportation, childcare, etc. Thank you for addressing how hard this is to study.
Yeah, I think these are big issues and very painful issues that we've unfortunately had to witness recently, even with the detention centers. It's always very contentious and just threatening to the kids, and that was my point with the welfare implications of even just a peaceful divorce, right? There's still, but if you take that just the divorce alone and make it a divorce that is coming out of a violent conflict potentially and into a period of not good communication and not cooperation, that can make it even more so. And that's where, when I mentioned the public goods, again, in the institution of marriage, you have two people who are jointly invested in the well-being of the child. But when you get divorced, and especially if there was some underlying issues that turn to be violent, often one of the spouses will be like, well, if I can't be with the kids now, then whatever, you do it, right? And it's not that they don't like their kids, but they know the other person will put the effort in because they're not just going to give up on their kids. So this underinvestment in these marriage-specific public goods is a huge consequence of divorce, right? Because you're counting on the other person to just pick up the slack for you, because why wouldn't they, right? So the implications are huge, and I don't have any experience with the domestic abuse, but it's definitely a channel that should be paid more attention to. But with any immigration studies, it is so hard to get good data that actually have the variables. You know, I would love to have the changes in visa status. I would love to have information on the previous spouses so that I can clearly have the timeline of decisions and actions, maybe not decisions, to do a better analysis. But we're sort of stuck as researchers with what's out there. And you know, domestic abuse very much underreported to begin with. So getting a true sense of what's going on is very, very difficult.
Yeah, I imagine one of the challenges of being an economist is being creative in ways to find data and think about how you can answer questions with limited resources or limited information.
Well, and also being careful that your research doesn't get misrepresented. Right. And as I mentioned, like at first, given my experiences, and I lived in Chicago for a long time before coming to South Bend, the market for the paper-only marriages there was fairly vibrant when I arrived there in the late 90s, early 2000s. So I first initially really wanted to look at that, but I was also warned by some of my colleagues that I don't want to put too much emphasis on that, because that could really steer public policy the wrong way. And it's not that's the issue. And the more I thought about what I was trying to say is that I'm really not looking at the paper marriages. I'm really more concerned with the real marriages that are taking place, but people are just making suboptimal decisions because of being pressured by just not having other options of being able to stay in the US legally and go to school and have a job and have a life.
Makes a lot of sense. Thank you very much. This was a very enjoyable presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you also to everyone else who joined today. I'm just going to do a quick plug for our next lecture with Estela Rivero, who is in the Pulte Institute for Global Development. She does some very interesting work on care workers, homework, domestic
And she
labor.
just did some project on domestic violence. So for all of you who are interested, join Estela, because she's done some work on that. She'll be much better equipped to talk about it.
And of course, information from the lockdown in the past few months, it's particularly topical.
Yes.
And relevant. So I encourage everyone to check out the webpage and look for an email with that. Thank you all again. Hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you.